People learned early which names would keep them fed and which names would get them beaten. And Genevieve had survived by answering to the smallest one offered: servant, girl, wolfless. Each word carried a different weight, but they all meant the same thing inside Blackthorn Estate. She belonged to everyone and to no one, useful only when silent, visible only when blamed. Hope, in that place, was not a bright thing. It was a disciplined thing, folded and hidden like contraband under a floorboard. She kept hers there for years, telling herself that endurance was a kind of strategy, that one more day could still become a life if she protected the part of herself they could not brand. Dawn arrived with frost crusting the inner courtyard and wood smoke trapped low between the servant quarters and the kennel wall. Genevieve knelt on stone with a pail of lye water that burned her cracked knuckles raw, scrubbing last night's grease from copper pans while kitchen boys stepped around her, as if she were a stain that had learned to move. Her hair, dark and too long, had slipped from its tie and clung damply to her neck. The brand at her inner wrist, a crescent pierced by a line to mark her as wolfless, throbbed each time cold air hit it. It had never fully healed straight. The scar tissue puckered white and silver, an ugly little moon the estate steward liked to tap with his cane when he needed the room to laugh. "Faster," Steward Guerin said now, his voice flat with the confidence of someone never denied obedience. He nudged her shoulder with the cane tip, not hard enough to bruise where others could see, hard enough to set pain humming down her arm. "The winter oath convoy leaves at dusk. If the hall is not clean, you do not ride." Ride? As if she had been invited. Servants sent to Mooncourt for the banquet returned thin and shaking, if they returned. They spoke in whispers of nobles who measured people the way butchers measured bone. Genevieve lowered her gaze. "Yes, steward." Guerin squatted beside her and gripped her chin between two fingers, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Use your voice properly. What are you?" The answer waited in her throat like grit. "Wolfless." "What does that make you?" "Less than pack-born." "Good." He stood, satisfied, and turned away. "Remember your place, and you may keep breathing in it." She kept scrubbing until the water went gray and oily, until the skin over her knuckles split again and stung. The courtyard smelled of old meat and ash. Wolves moved in the kennels, restless shapes behind iron lattice, and every scrape of claw on metal landed in her spine. She had been 8 when her first shift failed, and 13 when the estate priest declared her empty. At 15, she stopped counting the rites meant to force the wolf out of her body through fasting, cold, silver, prayer, and humiliation. At 22, she still woke from dreams where she ran on 4 legs through cedar forest, only to open her eyes in a pallet corner with chains hung beside the door as a warning. "I am not empty," she thought, the words precise and dangerous in her own mind. "I am tired. I am hungry. I am still here." They keep saying the same sentence until it sounds like law, and I keep living through it until their law starts to crack. If I were what they say, I would not feel this ache for a life I have never seen. I would not hide bread crusts for old Mara in the washroom. I would not remember my mother's hands tying my hair and calling me Genevieve Nightshade, as if that name could shelter me. I am still that child somewhere. I am still that name somewhere. If survival is all I can claim, then I will claim it with teeth. By noon, the estate's ruling family crossed the kitchen gallery in fur-lined cloaks, laughing over spiced wine while servants flattened themselves against the wall. Lady Verena Blackthorn paused when she saw Genevieve carrying a tray of trenchers and turned with theatrical pity toward her guests. "This one is our cautionary tale," Verena said, "proof that blood without blessing becomes labor." One of the visiting betas, broad-shouldered and flushed from drink, reached to touch Genevieve's branded wrist. She pulled back on instinct. The tray tilted, one trencher sliding and cracking on the floor. Silence hit the gallery. Verena's smile disappeared. Pick it up. Genevieve knelt. A shard bit into her palm. She did not flinch. Look at me, Verena said. Genevieve looked. You forget that we could have thrown you to rogues when your mother died. We gave you shelter. You took everything and called it shelter. The thought flashed so sharp it almost showed on her face. Verena leaned closer, voice soft enough to make terror intimate. At Moon Court tonight, keep your head down and your mouth shut. If anyone asks what you are, you tell them the truth. Defective, grateful, replaceable. The breaking point came at dusk with sleet rattling the windows and servants running lanterns to the coach line. Genevieve had been sent to the records room for sealing wax, a narrow chamber beneath the family offices where ledgers sweated damp and mice nested in torn vellum. She moved quietly by habit, shoulders rounded, eyes lowered. Voices drifted through the half-open study door above the stair. Steward Guerin first, Lady Verena second. A third voice she did not know, smooth and temple-trained. She travels with the scullery line, Verena said. No one at court will ask after one more kitchen girl. And after the banquet? Asked the stranger. Guerin answered. You wanted proof she is truly wolfless. Take her to your physicians. Break whatever needs breaking. The body confesses eventually. A rustle of paper. Wax stamp pressed. The stranger spoke again, almost bored. If the tests fail? Then drown her quietly, Verena said. Moon Court drains flood after feast nights. Accidents happen. Genevieve did not breathe. The wax stick slipped from her fingers and hit stone with a small clack that sounded to her louder than thunder. Footsteps halted above. Who is there? Guerin barked. She ran, not toward the servant hall, toward the rear coal passage where smoke blackened the ceiling and no noble set foot. Her lungs burned as she sprinted past stacked kindling and butcher hooks, past the laundry room where old Mara looked up with wide eyes, and then, without a word, shoved open the trapdoor to the ash chute. Go, Mara whispered. Do not come back. Genevieve dropped into darkness, sliding on cinders, palms scraping brick. She landed hard in the refuse pit behind the bakehouse, rolled, and kept moving. Bells began to ring inside the estate, sharp and rising. Hunt bells. Sleet hit her face like thrown gravel. She ducked behind the kennel wall as handlers loosed 2 tracking hounds into the yard, their noses lifting, whining at her scent. She yanked the apron from a clothesline and wrapped it around her shoulders to mask the worst of it with soap and boiled starch. Her feet, bare in thin kitchen shoes, skidded over frozen mud as she cut through the orchard and vaulted the boundary ditch. Branches whipped her cheeks. Cold knifed through soaked linen until her teeth knocked together hard enough to ache. At the far fence she reached into the seam of her bodice and felt the small metal shape sewn there years ago by her mother. A signet ring wrapped in cloth, too large for her fingers, engraved with a crest worn smooth by hiding, the only thing she had never surrendered. She did not know whether it was worth coin or memory, only that losing it felt like death in miniature. She pressed it once to her lips, then pushed through the broken cedar rail and into the road beyond Packlands. Wagons creaked east under canvas, headed for Moon Court with winter stores, kitchen staff, and musicians hired to make nobles feel holy while they drank. Genevieve stumbled toward the last cart and caught the back rail with numb hands. A woman in Cook's gray looked down from the tailboard, took in Genevieve's bleeding palms, and swore under her breath. You from Blackthorn? The woman asked. Genevieve nodded once. The woman's mouth tightened. Get under the flour sacks. If you steal, I break your fingers. If you stay quiet, you arrive breathing. Genevieve climbed in. The canvas dropped. The world narrowed to jolt and darkness and the smell of grain. By the time the convoy crossed the obsidian markers that ringed Moon Court territory, night had settled in full. Snow began in thin drifting lines, not enough to soften the fortress rising ahead, All black stone towers and silver fire braziers reflected in frozen water channels. Moon Court looked less like a home than a blade pushed point first into the mountainside. Wolves in guard harness paced the walls, oversized shadows with eyes bright as banked embers. Every gate carried runes that hummed against her skin when she passed, like distant thunder held behind bone. She slipped from the wagon among servants unloading barrels and ducked into the rear kitchens before anyone could count heads. Heat slammed into her face, rich with roasting venison, cloves, hot iron, and panic. The banquet had already begun. Bells rang from the great hall in measured intervals, oath bells, while head cooks shouted orders and pushed trays into shaking hands. "You!" barked a kitchen mistress with flour to her elbows, pointing at Genevieve. "Bucket, cloth, North Hall, Treaty Aisle. Move!" Genevieve took the bucket and ran. The corridor opened into a chamber so vast she forgot, for one dangerous heartbeat, to stay small. Moonlight poured through vaulted windows, silvering banners of old packs and glinting off polished armor. Nobles lined long tables in ceremonial black and white, rings flashing as they lifted cups in toasts that sounded like promises and threats in equal measure. At the far end, on a raised stone dais carved with runes older than the fortress itself, sat the Alpha King. Sebastian Duskwalker did not look like the stories told in servant quarters. He looked worse and stranger. Not because he was monstrous, but because he was controlled to a degree that felt inhuman, as if every movement had been measured against war and found efficient. Dark hair brushed his collar. A fur cloak lay across broad shoulders, unadorned except for the royal torque at his throat. He listened while an elder spoke, gaze steady, expression unreadable. Then his eyes tracked briefly across the hall and landed on Genevieve. The contact lasted a second. It still felt like stepping into deep water. She dropped her gaze and hurried to the treaty aisle, where an ancient stone slab stood between the dais and the first rank of tables. It was pitted with age, veined with metallic threads that caught the light. She knelt to wipe spilled wine from its base, fingers shaking from cold and hunger and the old reflexive fear of being seen. A splinter of broken goblet hidden in the rushes sliced the heel of her hand. She hissed, more surprise than pain. One dark bead of blood fell, struck the treaty stone, and vanished into the veinwork. Silence rippled outward. A hum rose under her knees. Silver light erupted through the slab in branching lines, raced up the carved channels and flared across Genevieve's skin beneath her sleeve, answering something buried in her blood with terrifying certainty. Gasps broke across the hall. A chair toppled. Someone shouted, "Nightshade." Another voice, sharper, said, "Wolfless witch." The runes along the dais blazed in response. Sebastian was already standing. "Seize her," he ordered, and every guard in the hall moved at once. Genevieve rose on trembling legs, bucket forgotten, cloth falling from numb fingers. Half the court looked ready to tear her apart where she stood. The Alpha King's gaze did not leave her face. "Alive," Sebastian said, his voice carrying like steel drawn from a sheath. "Bring her to my war chamber. Now." Two royal guards closed on Genevieve from either side, not rough, not kind, their gauntleted hands hovering near her elbows as if they expected her to bolt. She did not fight. Fighting in a room full of nobles would have meant dying in front of strangers who already looked relieved at the prospect. She walked because her knees still worked, and because the Alpha King had said alive, and alive was a narrower mercy than she had ever been offered at Blackthorn. The great hall's heat vanished as soon as the carved doors shut behind them. They moved through a corridor cut from dark mountain stone veined with old silver, torchlight flickering across battle murals where wolves ran beside crowned figures and rivers looked like blades. The sound of the banquet dulled to a distant pulse. Her palm still bled where the goblet shard had bitten deep, each drop warm against the winter-chilled skin of her wrist. The branded crescent there seemed to ache harder, as if the old scar objected to being contradicted. At the end of the passage, the guards halted before a door banded in iron and etched with protective runes. One of them knocked once, fist to chest. The reply came from within, low and precise. Inside. The chamber smelled of cedar smoke, ink, steel oil, and snow brought in on cloaks. Maps covered one wall, weighted with daggers. A long table stood at the center, burdened with sealed dispatches and carved markers shaped like wolves. Weapons lined the far rack in disciplined rows. Nothing ornamental, nothing soft. It was a room built for decisions that ended lives. Sebastian Duskwalker stood beside the war table, hands braced on the wood, head slightly bowed as if he had been listening for something under the stone. He lifted his gaze when she entered. Even in lamplight, his presence felt sharpened, cut down to function, like a weapon honed until the edge turned invisible. "Leave us," he told the guards. They hesitated. One dared. "Your Majesty, the court requested witnesses." His eyes never left Genevieve. "I did not." The door shut. The bolt dropped. Silence widened. Genevieve did not realize she had backed toward the weapon rack until her spine brushed cold metal. Her pulse hammered in her throat. Alone. Locked. Cornered with the most powerful alpha in the realm after exposing blood she could not explain. Every lesson beaten into her body at Blackthorn rose at once. Stay smaller, stay agreeable, do not give them a reason. Sebastian took one step toward her and stopped, leaving distance between them. "Name." Her voice came out rough. "Genevieve." "Surname." She swallowed. "I was told not to use one." "Use it now." The ring sewn into her bodice felt suddenly heavy, a hidden heartbeat against her sternum. Nightshade. The air changed. Not colder, denser. He studied her for a long moment, gaze moving from the blood on her hand to the scar at her wrist to her face again, as if assembling an answer from pieces that refused to belong in the same person. "How did you enter Mooncourt?" "Supply convoy." Her fingers curled against her skirt. "I hid in a flower cart." "Who sent you?" "No one." She let out one thin breath. "I ran." His jaw tightened at that single word. "From whom?" "Blackthorn Estate." She almost laughed at the absurdity of saying it plainly here, where names carried legal weight instead of only fear. "Lady Verena and Steward Garin planned to hand me to temple physicians after the banquet. If they could not prove I was defective, they intended to drown me." A small muscle jumped in his cheek. He looked, for the first time, less like carved stone and more like a man restraining force through will alone. "Did they touch the treaty stone through you before tonight?" "I was cleaning." She lifted her injured hand in a helpless gesture. "I cut myself." He moved then, abruptly, circling the table to a side cabinet. When he turned back, there was a bandage roll and a small knife in his hand. The knife he placed on the table, handle toward himself. The bandage he held out. "Give me your hand." Every nerve in her body snapped taut. She saw the knife, saw the locked door, saw no window low enough to reach, saw all the ways power rewrote promises. If he wanted blood for ritual, this would be the moment. If he wanted confession, pain would follow. Her heels struck the rack again when she tried to take one more step back and found nowhere left. His voice lowered, controlled. "Genevieve." She shook her head. "No." "Your hand is still bleeding." "I said no." The word came louder, edged with panic she hated him hearing. His nostrils flared once, catching her fear scent. He put the bandage down slowly, palms visible. "Then bind it yourself." She did not move. He took another careful breath, then reached for the knife on instinct, maybe to set it farther away, maybe to clear the table. She saw metal move and reacted without thought. Her hand shot toward the nearest dagger in the rack behind her, fingers closing around the hilt. He caught her wrist. Heat slammed up her arm so hard she gasped. Not surface warmth. A molten current, bright and brutal, rushing through skin and bone, up shoulder, through chest, into the place behind her ribs she had trained herself not to feel. Sebastian inhaled sharply as if struck. His grip loosened but did not release. Amber bled into his irises, brightening until something ancient looked through his gaze with raw, stunned recognition. Storm rain and cedar flooded the room, sudden and impossible indoors, his scent sharpening, hers answering with wildflower and clean frost she had never smelled on herself before. The runes at his throat flared to life beneath skin, lines of old script igniting gold one after another. He staggered as if the floor had tilted, one hand bracing against the table, then dropped to one knee with a sound torn between pain and reverence. Genevieve stood frozen, wrist still in his, breath coming in short, shocked pulls. Her heartbeat struck hard enough to hurt, then shifted, matched his, beat for beat. No, she thought. And then the thought disintegrated under sensation. Awareness prickled along her spine. A low thrum built in her chest, not fear and not hunger, and not anything she had language for. She had been told all her life that she lacked the essential thing, the sacred thing, the wolf-bonding capacity everyone else inherited at birth. Yet his touch had found a lock inside her and turned it. This is a mistake. This is a trick of blood loss, of terror, of wanting one kind word so badly that the body invents prophecy to survive. I am not the woman songs are written for. I am not chosen. I am the one scrubbed from ledgers, the one they brand and call useful when kneeling. But his pulse is in my pulse, and I can feel the shape of his restraint like a hand around a blade, careful not to cut me. If this is fate, fate is cruel or mad. If this is mating magic, the world has lied to me since childhood. I should pull away. I should run. I should do anything except stand here and let this feeling root itself. Yet my hand will not leave his. My body recognizes him before my mind can refuse. Sebastian lifted his head slowly. From this distance, she could see the shock in him with nowhere to hide. Centuries of discipline fractured by a single point of contact. He looked not triumphant but unsteady, as if he had spent a lifetime preparing for every threat except this one. Outside, boots pounded down the corridor. Voices rose at the door. "Your Majesty." "Open." The latch rattled. Sebastian released her wrist with visible effort and stood in one controlled motion, runes dimming but not disappearing. When he spoke, his voice was roughened at the edges. "Enter." The door opened to admit Captain Rowan Vale, scarred, broad-shouldered, and visibly alarmed, followed by two court physicians carrying silver cases. Rowan's eyes flicked from Sebastian to Genevieve, to the still glowing lines at the king's throat. Whatever he expected to find, it was not this. "My king," Rowan said carefully, "the council demands immediate verification. They fear spell contamination from the treaty stone." One physician, thin and eager, stepped forward and bowed to Sebastian, then looked at Genevieve with detached interest. "A wolfless activation event requires testing. Reflex silver exposure, glandular provocation, marrow resonance, pain threshold." "No," Sebastian said. The physician blinked. "Sire, protocol under oath law is explicit. We must establish defect status before dawn session." Sebastian's gaze went cold enough to frost iron. "You will establish nothing by cutting her open in my chamber." "It is not cutting, Your Majesty. It is a forcing sequence." The second physician opened his case. Inside lay needles, vials, and a narrow set of restraints with runic clasps. "If she carries dormant beast response, stress will draw it." Genevieve's stomach dropped. She knew those tools. Different shape, same purpose. Blackthorn had called it correction. Temple men called it sanctification, pain with a sacred accent. The first physician moved toward her, hand already reaching for her arm. Sebastian intercepted him in 2 strides and caught his wrist midair, grip deceptively casual. You heard me. Sire, if she is false claimed and the court discovers you concealed. Bone popped softly under Sebastian's tightening fingers. The physician went white. I concealed nothing, Sebastian said. I am giving an order. He released the man, then turned to Rowan. Take them out. Reassign both to outer infirmary rotations until I say otherwise. Rowan inclined his head at once. As commanded. The physicians protested all the way to the door, the words holy risk and legal necessity and dangerous precedent tumbling over each other. Sebastian did not answer. When the bolt fell again, quiet returned, fragile and thin. Genevieve had not realized she was shaking until she saw her own hands. She pressed them together to hide it. Why? He faced her fully. Why what? Why stop them? Her laugh was small, brittle. You barely know my name. The entire court thinks I am a fraud. The court can think in line behind me. He lifted the bandage from the table and this time waited. May I? The question hit harder than the bond had. May I? Not command, not assumption. She nodded once. He stepped close enough that she felt his warmth in the cold room, but not close enough to trap her, then took her injured hand as if it were something breakable he intended to keep intact. His thumbs were rough with old calluses. He cleaned the cut with water from a pitcher. Movements efficient, careful. She flinched when cloth touched raw skin. He paused immediately. Tell me if it hurts. It hurts. He met her eyes. Tell me anyway. He wrapped the bandage snugly and tied it off. Then, after a beat, he reached into a chest near the hearth and withdrew a comb carved from dark horn. She stared at him, confused, as he held it out. You go before the court at first bell, he said. They smell fear. They read disorder as surrender. Her hand lifted to her hair by reflex, finding knots stiff with dried sleet and kitchen smoke. I can manage. I know. A slight tilt of his mouth. Almost not a smile. Do you permit assistance? No one had asked permission to touch her hair since her mother died. The memory struck so sharply her throat tightened. She lowered herself onto the bench by the hearth without speaking. Sebastian stood behind her and began to work through the tangles in slow sections, patient when knots caught, never yanking, never using pain as correction. The chamber filled with small sounds, comb teeth through strands, wood settling in fire, both of them breathing more evenly than before. When he gathered the final length and braided it, the motion was practiced, almost intimate in its familiarity. Who taught you that? She asked, voice barely above the crackle of flame. My sister, he said after a pause, before she died. Grief crossed his scent for an instant, clean and old and deeply buried. He finished the braid and tied it with a plain leather cord from his own wrist. Listen to me now, he said. She turned to face him. No one touches your body in my territory without your consent. Not physician, not priest, not noble, not me. She searched his face for performance and found strain instead, the cost of saying words that would bind him publicly if repeated. Even if the council orders it. I am the order. Dawn came pale and hard over Moon Court, light spilling through high windows like watered steel. Genevieve stood at the edge of the great hall in a borrowed charcoal gown that fit better than anything she had ever owned and still felt like a costume on a body trained for invisibility. Her braid lay neat down her back. The leather tie at its end warmed under her fingers each time she touched it to steady herself. The chamber had changed since last night. Not in shape, in posture. Nobles filled the benches in ceremonial ranks, sigil cloaks arranged to advertise alliances. Priests in moon-white robes occupied the inner arc near the dais. Murmurs traveled like insects through dry grass, rising when she entered, then splitting into words no one bothered to hide. Unholy bond. Wolfless deception. Stone sorcery. Cordelia Silvermane stood near the front in silver-threaded black, beauty honed to a weapon's edge, her expression composed enough to pass for concern if one ignored the satisfaction beneath it. She lifted her chin when Genevieve appeared, eyes cool and appraising, and whispered something to the elder beside her that made him nod. Rowan led Genevieve to the open floor below the throne dais and stopped. "Stay at my left," he murmured. "If they crowd you, step behind me." She gave a tight nod. Across the hall, Sebastian took his seat on the elevated stone chair carved with wolves and lunar runes. He wore no crown, only the royal torque, but command settled around him more visibly than gold ever could. A council elder rose, staff striking once for silence. By winter oath law, the woman identifying as Genevieve Nightshade stands accused of fraudulent blood claim, ritual disruption, and unlawful influence over the sovereign through corrupted bond practice. Pending purification, we petition temporary confinement. The word confinement hit Genevieve's spine like a lash. Cells, chains, water. Her mouth went dry. Cordelia stepped forward, voice clear and carrying. "No one wishes cruelty. We ask only order. If she is innocent, rights will prove it. If not, the realm must be protected from blasphemous attachment. A king cannot be governed by fever." Laughter, thin and mean, flickered from a cluster of younger lords. Sebastian did not answer immediately. He rose, descended the dais steps one by one, and crossed the floor until he stood beside Genevieve instead of above her. Then he did something that stole the hall's breath. He knelt. Not in weakness, in declaration. His voice carried to the rafters. "Under Alpha Law, I name Genevieve Nightshade my protected equal. Any hand raised to seize, strike, confine, test, or degrade her, without her explicit consent is a hand raised against the crown." The silence that followed was stunned and furious and afraid. A lord from the eastern benches surged to his feet, face reddening. "You would place a servant-born pretender over blood houses that upheld this realm before your grandsire first shifted." He stepped down from his row as if to drag Genevieve back by authority alone. Rowan moved, but Sebastian was faster. Power rolled off him in a visible pressure wave, an alpha aura so dense the torches guttered. Stone cracked at his boots in a sharp, ringing line. The advancing lord stumbled to one knee, choking on the force, palms flattening to the floor. "Finish that step," Sebastian said quietly, "and I will sentence you for treason before your next breath." No one moved. Genevieve felt the air on her skin, charged and vibrating, and realized with disorienting clarity that his fury was not performative. It was precise, directional, and entirely for her protection. Blackthorn men had wielded power like weather, striking whatever stood nearest. This was different. This was a wall. Cordelia recovered first, smile thin as drawn wire. "Your Majesty mistakes passion for law." Sebastian turned his head toward her, and the amber in his gaze deepened. "I am law in this hall." The elder with the staff cleared his throat, shaken. "Then how does the crown propose to proceed, sire?" "With evidence," Sebastian said, "not superstition. House archives will be opened, temple records audited by neutral scribes. Any witness brought against Genevieve will be examined under oath binding." Murmurs rose again, less certain now. Cordelia's hands folded neatly before her. "And until then?" "Until then," Sebastian said, still kneeling at Genevieve's side, "she remains under my direct protection." He looked up at Genevieve then, the feral edge in him settling by fractions when their eyes met. The room remained dangerous. The accusation remained. Nothing had been solved. Yet beneath the noise of noble outrage, her body registered an unfamiliar sensation. Not safety exactly, but the first architecture of it, beam by cautious beam. She drew a slow breath and held his gaze. When she spoke, her voice trembled only at the edges. "I consent to questioning, not to violation." He inclined his head, formal as a vow. Heard. The knot behind her ribs loosened by the smallest measurable degree. She did not trust fate. She did not trust courts. She did not yet trust what burned between them when skin met skin. But as the hall erupted into argument and Sebastian rose to stand beside her through all of it, she allowed one guarded truth to take root. He was not like the men who had owned her fear. He was not like the men who had owned her fear, and that recognition had barely settled when the elder's staff struck again, demanding order that no one intended to give. Voices collided across the hall, noble houses arguing precedent, priests invoking purity clauses, council scribes trying and failing to record all of it. Sebastian lifted one hand, and the noise broke into ragged silence. "Council recess?" he said. "1 hour. Any accusation submitted after that hour without sworn corroboration will be treated as malicious petition." Cordelia inclined her head with graceful obedience that did not reach her eyes. "Then I will use the hour well, Your Majesty." She turned, skirts whispering over stone, and moved toward the inner colonnade where senior houses gathered when they wanted conspiracy wrapped in etiquette. Two priests in moon white peeled away from the ark and fell in beside her. An older noble with silver-mane colors joined from the east benches. None of them looked at Genevieve directly. All of them spoke with their mouths barely moving. Rowan touched Genevieve's elbow. "With me." Sebastian's gaze found hers for a brief beat. "War chamber. Do not stop for anyone." Genevieve nodded and followed Rowan through a side passage, pulse still unsettled from the public declaration and the way Cordelia had smiled as if she had already priced the ending. The corridor bent around the back of the ceremonial wing, past carved screens that should have blocked sound and did not quite manage it. At the third screen, Rowan slowed abruptly and raised a hand for silence. Voices carried through the latticework, clear enough to separate. Cordelia first, cool and clipped. "By dusk we submit temple ledgers and witness affidavits. Use the language of contamination. Council elders panic when a rite sounds threatened." A male voice, priestly, uncertain. "If the ledgers are inspected against original seals, Lady Cordelia, there is risk. Then they will not be inspected by anyone competent." A soft rustle of parchment. "You will cite emergency doctrine and demand expedited purification under full moon authority. I want confinement before midnight." Another voice, rougher, likely the older Silvermane noble. "And the king." "The king is not immune to old law," Cordelia said. "Not when enough houses invoke it together. He may posture as protector. He cannot ignore a unanimous right petition without splitting the realm." The priest lowered his voice, but Genevieve still caught every word. "You are certain she is not truly Nightshade." A pause, then Cordelia answered with contempt, stripped bare. "She is a kitchen stray with fortunate blood and no wolf. If she becomes acceptable, every hierarchy in this court unravels. Servants will claim lineage, wolfless children will demand rank. Pack law will become sentiment. I will not let one anomaly burn down the order that keeps us sovereign." Rowan's jaw hardened. He drew Genevieve quietly backward before the voices shifted closer to the screen. They continued down the passage in silence until the war chamber door shut behind them and the bolt slid home. She stood in the center of the room, cold despite the hearth. "She does not only want me gone." "No," Rowan said. "She wants the throne arranged back into something she can inherit." He looked as though he regretted speaking, then exhaled and leaned against the map table with soldierly resignation. "There has been pressure for years to formalize an alliance marriage between the crown and House Silvermane. Cordelia was raised for it, trained for it. She built half her influence on being considered inevitable." "Inevitable," Genevieve repeated, tasting the word like iron. Rowan gave a tight shrug. The king never accepted the contract terms. He delayed. She called it strategy. Everyone else called it patience. Genevieve's hand went to the seam of her bodice by reflex, fingertips finding the hidden ring through cloth. And now she calls me contamination. She calls you a threat she can frame as religion. Rowan's expression shifted from hard to careful. Listen closely. People like Cordelia are most dangerous when they speak softly and ask for process. They kill with procedures no one wants to challenge. The door opened without warning. Sebastian stepped in, carrying 3 sealed folios and controlled fury. He took in Rowan's posture, Genevieve's face, and needed no explanation. "You heard her?" he said. Genevieve met his gaze. "Enough." He crossed to the table and broke the first seal. "Then we work faster than she does." The next hours became a grind of ink, witness lists, and legal traps disguised as piety. Scribes rotated through under Rowan's supervision, each sworn to neutrality, and each subtly terrified of being caught between the crown and Silvermane influence. Sebastian stood at Genevieve's side as affidavits were read aloud. Statements from servants she had never met claiming she dosed broth with bitterroot during her escape. A temple copy register naming the Nightshade line moon-cursed and ritually stripped 2 generations prior. A testimony from a kennel hand at Blackthorn asserting she confessed envy of pack-born women and vowed to ruin the Winter Oath. "None of this is true," Genevieve said for what felt like the 20th time. "I know," Sebastian answered each time, never impatient, as if repetition itself were a brace he was helping her hold. Yet lies, when written in formal script and stamped with borrowed seals, acquired a shape that truth had to fight for. By late afternoon, the pressure in the fortress had changed. Servants who had offered cautious nods now avoided her eyes. 2 guards assigned to the war wing asked Rowan in hushed tones whether her scent had altered since last night, as though she might erupt into plague. A priest left charcoal sigils on the door lintel and called them blessings. Rowan scrubbed them off with his own hands. When the 3rd scribe departed, silence dropped heavy and intimate. Stormlight gathered against the windows. Sebastian loosened the torque at his throat as if it had become a restraint rather than regalia. "I can stop this by decree," he said, more to himself than to her. "I can suspend right law under wartime authority. Can you hold the realm if you do?" Genevieve's voice stayed steady through effort. "Or will Cordelia get what she wants anyway, only with a civil fracture to feed on?" He looked up sharply. "You are not responsible for my counsel." "No. But I live in the consequences of your choices." The truth sat between them, clean-edged. He nodded once, accepting it. She turned away from him and braced both hands on the table, breath shallow, thoughts accelerating until they hurt. "I am so tired of proving that I exist in ways they consider valid. I am tired of rooms where men debate whether my body belongs to law or to me. I want to stop shaking. I want to trust the heat in my chest when he stands near me, and that want frightens me more than Cordelia does because wanting makes leverage, and leverage becomes chains. Yet he keeps asking instead of taking. He keeps making space where no one made space before. If I lean toward him, do I disappear into another kind of ownership? Or do I become visible in a way that finally feels like life?" Behind her, Sebastian moved closer, slow enough to be denied. "Genevieve." She did not turn. "If I tell you I am afraid of this bond, will you call me disloyal?" His answer came immediately. "No." "If I tell you I want it anyway?" A long pause. "Then I will call you honest." She faced him then, and the air between them seemed to narrow to breath and pulse, and the quiet violence of restraint. He lifted his hand, stopped a few inches from her cheek, and waited. She closed the distance herself. His palm settled lightly against her face, warm, grounding, nothing demanded. The contact sent a low current through her chest that felt less like fire and more like recognition settling into bone. A knock fractured the moment. Rowan entered with a folded dispatch, expression grim. Emergency petition filed. 12 houses and 4 temple offices. They request provisional confinement and a purification hearing at full moon. Sebastian's hand dropped from her cheek. Full moon is in 2 nights. They claim accelerated risk. Rowan held out the dispatch. And they attached this. Sebastian scanned the page, jaw tightening. He passed it to Genevieve. At the bottom, in hard black ink, was Cordelia's signature beneath a formal declaration. Lawful future Luna claimant acting in defense of crown purity. She signs herself already crowned, Genevieve said quietly. She signs as if language can make fate obey, Sebastian answered. Dusk deepened. Bells marked the evening hearing. The court reconvened in the smaller judgment chamber, a circular room with tiered stone seating and a moon basin at its center, currently dry. Every sound carried. Every whisper returned. Cordelia stood beneath torchlight in ceremonial silver, flanked by the same priests Genevieve had overheard. On a pedestal beside her lay a velvet-wrapped object, still covered. She waited until Sebastian and Genevieve entered, then bowed with perfect form. Your Majesty, my lords, revered clergy, I regret the necessity of this petition. She let the phrase linger with practiced sorrow. But necessity remains. She presented documents one by one, each delivered to the elder clerk with flourished care. Temple record of the Nightshade censure, affidavit from Blackthorn staff regarding poison intent, witness statement from convoy personnel, supplemental legal opinion invoking emergency purification if sovereign judgment may be compromised by predatory bond influence. A murmur ran through the tiers at predatory bond influence. Genevieve felt heat rise in her face, not shame, anger. Sebastian's voice cut across the chamber. You accuse your king of compromised sovereignty in open court. I accuse no one, Cordelia said smoothly. I protect the institution. The elder clerk adjusted his lenses and read in a faltering monotone while Genevieve watched the room tilt toward ritual certainty. Law here was not neutral. Law was a weapon held by whichever hand reached first. Then Cordelia lifted the velvet cloth. On the pedestal, catching torchlight like frozen moonfire, lay the Nightshade's signet ring. Genevieve stopped breathing. The seam of her bodice was still stitched. She had checked it twice while dressing for the hearing. Yet the ring was there, undeniable. Crest worn smooth exactly where her mother's thumb had rubbed it years ago. Cordelia's gaze found hers, triumphant at last. This was recovered from a bribed forger in the lower quarter, along with materials for counterfeit lineage marks. The accused has manufactured a blood claim using stolen symbols. That is mine, Genevieve said, voice raw. It was hidden on my person. Cordelia lifted one brow. A convenient revision. Sebastian stepped forward, aura tightening the room by degrees. Chain of custody. The priest at Cordelia's right answered quickly. Temple enforcers seized it at 6th bell from a suspect now in protective silence. Name the suspect. Confessional privilege bars disclosure until purification. Rowan muttered a curse under his breath. Genevieve stared at the ring and felt a cold, precise understanding slide into place. Cordelia had people inside the royal wing, people close enough to touch her clothes, her bed, her guarded spaces. This was not improvisation. It was architecture. The elder clerk set down the final affidavit with shaking fingers. By petition weight and submitted evidence, the council is empowered to order temporary right confinement pending full moon purification. Sebastian's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. Order it, and you answer for each breath she takes under restraint. No one spoke. Then the oldest priest in the chamber stood, leaning on a moon-carved staff. Majesty, refusal of purification under this volume of sworn accusation will be read as sacrilege by half your territories. We stand on fracture already. Permit the right, and truth resolves publicly. Deny it, and blood follows in the streets. Cordelia did not smile this time. She watched Sebastian with hunger stripped of pretense, waiting to see whether he would choose her terrain or civil ruin. Genevieve heard her own heartbeat, steadying instead of racing. Fear remained, but it had changed shape. Less drowning wave and more sharpened line. She stepped forward before Sebastian could answer. "What are the terms?" she asked. Sebastian turned on her. "No." She held his gaze. "If you refuse, she calls you tyrant and me corrupter. If you accept without condition, she binds me in her right. So I ask again, what are the terms?" The elder clerk swallowed. "Confinement in Moonward quarters under guard. No physical coercion before ritual hour. Full moon purification overseen by council and crown. Accuser may present evidence. Accused may respond." Cordelia added softly, "And if the bond is judged unholy, it is severed before witnesses." Sebastian's hand closed around the back of a stone chair until the carved wolf head cracked under his grip. "You do not get to define holiness." "Then prove me wrong in the circle," Cordelia said. A bell rang once, signaling decision. The elder looked between king and accused, voice barely audible. "We require assent or refusal now." Genevieve drew one slow breath, tasting cedar and storm from Sebastian, incense and polished malice from Cordelia, old stone and winter and the iron edge of a life narrowing to a single choice. When she spoke, the chamber seemed to lean toward her. "I assent," she said, "but under royal challenge right. Any sworn participant in the rite answers to truth compulsion if invoked in the circle." Shock rippled through the tears. The old priest blanched. Cordelia's composure fractured for one heartbeat before she recovered. Sebastian stared at Genevieve, fury and fear and reluctant pride colliding openly in his face. "Do you understand what that binds you to?" "Yes," she said, and this time she did not tremble. "Do you?" The decision bell struck a second time. Guards moved from the walls toward the floor, not yet touching, forming the ring that meant her freedom had become conditional. Outside, thunder rolled over Moon Court, and the first full Moonwatch horn began to sound. Outside, thunder rolled over Moon Court, and the first full Moonwatch horn began to sound. The note carried through stone like a warning pulled across bone, and the guards tightened formation around Genevieve with the practiced caution of men escorting either royalty or a bomb. They took her to Moonward quarters cut into the inner wall, a chamber with one narrow window, 2 sentries at the door, and fresh chalk sigils burned into the threshold. Rowan himself set the watch rotation, dismissed a priest who tried to hang purification bells above the bed, and remained until the lock settled. "No one enters without your yes," he said, glancing once at the sigils as if daring them to challenge him. "That order comes from both of you." Both of you. The words landed with strange weight. Sleep never came. Moonlight climbed the wall inch by inch, while temple acolytes moved through the corridor outside, whispering invocations with the dry, hungry cadence of people preparing a spectacle. Somewhere farther down the hall, someone laughed quietly and said, "By dawn, she will confess." Genevieve sat on the edge of the narrow bed and pressed her palm over her sternum, where the bond hummed low and relentless. Not panic, not peace. A call she could neither silence nor obey without cost. "I have spent years surviving by shrinking. Keep your head down. Keep your voice soft. Endure the room. Endure the hands. Endure the names." That strategy kept me breathing, but breathing was never the same as living. If I step into that circle and fail, they kill me as a liar and call it holy. If I refuse, they cage me and call it order. If I let him break law to save me, they tear his realm apart and call it justice. There is no clean path left. Only chosen damage. So choose. Choose the wound you can stand in. When the second horn sounded, the door opened. Sebastian filled the threshold in dark ceremonial leather, torque at his throat, no cloak, no crown, only the stripped-down authority of a king who expected to fight for every inch of his own law. His gaze scanned her face, the intact window, the untouched restraints hanging on the far wall, and something in his shoulders eased. "They moved the right to the ancient stone circle," he said. "Cordelia insisted on open witness." "Of course she did." He crossed to her and stopped a breath away. "I can still dissolve this with force." "You can dissolve the circle," Genevieve said. "Not the story they will tell after." His jaw set. "I care less about stories than your safety. And I care about both." She lifted her chin. "Do not take this choice from me." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he reached into his belt and drew out a short blade in a plain sheath, offering it handle first. "Ceremonial knives are balanced to slip when wet. This one is not." His voice roughened. "Use it if you need to." She took it and tucked it into the hidden seam at her hip. Their fingers brushed. Heat climbed her wrist in a controlled burn, familiar now, no less devastating. He leaned his forehead to hers for one brief second, an intimacy so restrained it felt like prayer, then stepped back and signaled Rowan. The procession to the circle cut through the fortress courtyard and out into the old ritual grounds beyond the east wall, where winter grass lay silver under a rising full moon and monoliths ringed a basin carved from black stone. Torches lined the perimeter. Nobles packed the terraces in layered furs, priests in white formed an inner arc, and soldiers stood between both groups, hands near sword hilts. Snow had not fallen, but the cold bit hard enough to smoke every breath. Cordelia waited at the basin in moon-thread robes, the stolen nightshade signet displayed on a chain at her throat, expression serene as carved marble. At her feet lay the purification chain, each link etched with compulsion runes, one end bolted to the altar ring. "Bring the accused," the oldest priest called. Rowan moved with Genevieve to the circle edge. Sebastian followed and reached for her elbow, intent clear in the tension of his hand. "No," she said quietly. "Genevieve, if I stand behind you, this remains your trial." She stepped out of his reach and into the center alone. "Tonight, it is mine." The old priest raised his staff. "By petition and moon authority, we begin the severance inquiry. Kneel, accused." Genevieve remained standing. "I invoke royal challenge right under nightshade blood." Noise broke around the terrace, shocked and immediate. Cordelia's composure cracked by a fraction. "She has no standing to invoke." "She does if her blood answers," the old priest snapped, clearly hating the answer. He struck his staff once. Challenge accepted. All sworn participants are bound to reciprocal truth compulsion if activated. Sebastian's scent sharpened at the perimeter, storm and steel. He did not interfere. The ritual began with temple recitation, then accusations cast into the basin like stones. Fraud, contamination, manipulative seduction, false lineage. As each charge landed, pale runes lit under the basin lip and climbed higher. A priest approached Genevieve with the purification chain. "Kneel and extend your wrists." She let the link settle over her forearms, cold, bit deep. The runes flared, tasting for submission. Cordelia stepped down from the altar platform, lifted a silver bowl, and spoke for all to hear. "Confess fabrication and accept bond severance. Mercy may yet be granted." Genevieve looked at her, then at the thousands of watching faces, and understood the shape of the trap in full. This rite was never designed to find truth. It was designed to force posture into fact. But old laws had teeth if someone dared use them, and she was done being managed by people who mistook obedience for virtue. She drew Sebastian's blade, turned it inward, and cut her own palm in a clean line. Blood welled bright and immediate. Gasps rose from the terraces as she lifted her hand over the basin and let 5 drops fall. "I am Genevieve Nightshade," she said, voice carrying clear in the frozen air. Daughter of Elspeth Nightshade, last direct heir of House Nightshade through the Queen line sealed during the Red Winter Accords, I call the bond before moon witness. I call reciprocal truth. Let every oath sworn here answer itself. The basin ignited silver. Runes tore along the chain on her wrists, searching for the original command. Genevieve felt the current bite through bone and seized the links with both hands before the compulsion could complete. Pain flashed white across her vision. She dug in anyway, dragging the chain across the blood on her palm, forcing her blood into the etched grooves as her mother's ring crest blazed in the basin reflection. Redirect, she whispered through clenched teeth, not to the accused, to the accuser. The runes bucked, then flipped. Cordelia jerked as if struck, bowl shattering at her feet. No. Truth accepts all sworn participants, Genevieve said, breath ragged. You wanted a right. Stand in it. The compulsion hit like a bell drop. The basin surface convulsed, darkened, then opened into living memory. Not illusion. Record. Images rose in liquid silver with brutal clarity. Cordelia at a desk stamping forged temple censure pages with counterfeit seals, coin ledgers marked with bribes to 3 witnesses, Steward Guerin receiving a purse beside the Blackthorn carriage house, Lady Verena signing a transport order and saying, clear as if present. If the tests fail, drown her quietly. Then Cordelia again, voice cold, giving instructions to a cloaked enforcer in the lower quarter. Remove the ring from her quarters, place it with the forger. We need certainty by hearing bell. Silence slammed the terraces. Cordelia staggered backward, face drained. Fabrication, blood magic forgery. The basin answered by casting a final memory. Cordelia in the temple archive, whispering to the same priest now standing at her right. If she reaches the circle alive, put the blade in her womb and call it ritual accident. Sebastian moved 1 step into the circle, murderous calm in every line of him. Rowan caught his arm, holding by force of trust and protocol both. She has it, Rowan said, voice low. Let her finish. Cordelia's eyes went wild. She snatched a concealed silver blade from her sleeve and lunged, not at Genevieve's throat, lower, toward her abdomen with a scream that sounded nothing like noble composure. Genevieve met her head on. She pivoted left, trapped Cordelia's wrist in the still glowing chain, and yanked hard across her own body. The blade skittered from Cordelia's grip, slicing harmlessly into the grass. Momentum carried Cordelia forward into the altar steps. Genevieve drove her down with the chain, wrapped it twice around Cordelia's forearm and throat without choking, then hooked the free end through the altar ring and cinched until Cordelia could not rise. The crowd erupted. Guards surged inward. Priests shouted conflicting orders. Sebastian reached the circle edge and stopped exactly where Genevieve had asked him to, eyes locked on her, waiting for her command. Cordelia strained against the links, hair loose, dignity gone. You think this makes you sovereign? Genevieve stood over her, blood drying on her palm, breath smoke in moonlight. You called me unholy to hide your hunger for a crown. Cordelia spat at her boots. You were born empty. Genevieve's voice did not lift. It did not need to. Empty things do not break empires. She turned to the old priest and the council elders now forcing their way through the guards. Under challenge right and witness truth, I sentence Cordelia Silvermane to permanent exile beyond pack borders, blood seal enforcement, strip rank, title, temple standing, and succession claim. The oldest elder stared at the basin, then at Cordelia bound in her own chain. Sentence is lawful. Do it, Sebastian said, and the command cracked like thunder. A blood seal clerk was shoved forward, hands shaking, ritual knife glinting. He cut Cordelia's palm, pressed it to the exile tablet, and recited the stripping clauses while runes consumed her house marks one by one. Priests who had backed her were dragged to their knees for perjury review. Rowan barked orders, and soldiers peeled away toward the stables with names from the basin memories. Garin, Verena, the bribed witnesses, the archive forger. Cordelia was hauled upright, wrists shackled in iron now instead of ceremony. As they dragged her toward the outer gate, she twisted once, meeting Sebastian's eyes with naked hatred. "You doom your line for her." Sebastian did not blink. "I save it by choosing her." When the last of Cordelia's escort disappeared into the dark and the terraces began to empty under armed supervision, Genevieve's knees finally threatened to fold. Sebastian crossed the circle in 3 strides and caught her before she dropped. One arm around her back, the other bracing her bloodied hand with impossible gentleness. "You are hurt. Cut palm. Bruised pride." Her laugh came thin and exhausted. "Not dead." His forehead touched hers again, harder this time, gratitude and fury and awe shaking through him in silent waves. "You terrified me. You infuriated me. Fair." A startled snort escaped her, brief and absurd in the wreckage of a near coup. It broke the last taut wire in her chest. She leaned into him, and his hold tightened around her as if he had been waiting lifetimes to be allowed. By the time the circle was cleared, moonlight stood high and clean over the stones. Rowan approached, reported the arrests in clipped detail, then hesitated with visible discomfort before speaking softer. "The king requested privacy in the inner sanctum. I can post at distance." Genevieve lifted her head from Sebastian's shoulder. "At distance?" Rowan nodded and withdrew with the guards. The inner sanctum beneath the circle was older than the fortress above it, a vaulted chamber carved directly into bedrock, walls etched with faded queen-line sigils and wolf emblems twined together instead of ranked apart. A single fire burned in a bronze basin. The air held cedar, stone dust, and the metallic trace of her blood. Sebastian washed her cut hand first, kneeling before her as if this, too, were law. When he finished, he sat back on his heels and looked up, expression raw with restraint. "I need your answer clear," he said. "No ritual pressure, no witnesses, no duty. Do you want this claim tonight?" Genevieve's throat tightened. No one had ever asked her what she wanted as if the answer might alter the world. She stepped closer and guided his hand to her throat, fingers pressing at the pulse point beneath her jaw. "Yes," she whispered. "I want you. I choose this. Mine by choice, not capture." His eyes closed briefly as though the words themselves hurt from relief. "Yours by choice," he said. "Always." He rose, hands framing her face, and gave her time to pull away. She did not. His mouth brushed her forehead, her cheek, the line of her jaw, reverent and shaking. When his lips found the junction of her neck and shoulder, his breath warmed her skin first, a warning and a promise. Then his teeth sank in. Pain flashed bright, sharp enough to steal air. She gripped his shoulders, nails biting leather, and rode the first fierce wave without retreat. The bite deepened, sealed, and the pain transformed, opening into a rush of heat that spread through her chest and spine like winter thaw under river ice. Not possession, recognition. Doors unbolting one after another inside her. The bond flooded open. She felt him as he had been and was, a boy learning to lead after burying a sister. A young alpha taught that tenderness invited betrayal. A king standing alone in war chambers at dawn, choosing strategy over sleep because everyone else depended on his certainty. She felt his loneliness, vast and disciplined, and his terror tonight when Cordelia lunged. In return, he received her years at Blackthorn, the brand, the ash shoot, Mara's whispered go, the endless hunger to be seen as fully alive. Shame passed between them and dissolved on contact with something larger and steadier. He released the bite and pressed his forehead to her shoulder, breathing hard. Blood marked his mouth. Her skin, the old stone below. Mine, he whispered, voice broken. She cupped his face, thumb brushing the blood from his lower lip. Yours, she answered. Mate. Then she bared her own teeth. He stilled, pulse hammering beneath her palm where she slid it under the open collar at his chest, over the place his heart struck hardest. My turn, she said. A rough, disbelieving laugh escaped him. God's. Yes. She bit down over his heart through skin and muscle, not to wound, but to claim, holding until she felt the bond answer from his side with a deep, resonant pull. He hissed, hands tightening at her waist, then a shudder ran through him that felt like surrender and arrival in the same breath. Heat surged back through her, doubled now, weaving their pulses into one steady rhythm that no court could legislate out of existence. When she lifted her head, his chest bore the mark, already rimmed with faint gold from the runes awakening beneath. He caught her wrist, pressed her blood-smeared palm to his sternum over it, and said, fierce and clear, "No world where I do not choose you." She leaned in until their mouths almost touched. No throne without me, no silence between us. Agreed. They kissed then, not hurried, not performative, a long, anchoring seal while the bond settled from wildfire into living warmth, threaded through every breath. The room seemed to expand around them. The old sigils along the walls lit one by one, silver and amber braided together. When they finally broke apart, both were shaking with exhausted relief. He gathered her into his lap beside the fire, cloak wrapped around both of them, and they stayed like that, while moonlight shifted across the sanctum floor. He stroked the braid he had tied that morning, thumb finding the worn leather cord. She traced the line of runes at his throat, now steady instead of flaring. Neither spoke for a long time. They did not need to. The bond carried the words underneath language. Here, here, here. At dawn, they climbed the palace steps together. The great hall stood packed beyond capacity. Every house called, every priest required, soldiers lining the walls in full armor. Cordelia's faction benches sat half empty, their leaders under guard in the lower cells. Verena Blackthorn and Steward Garin knelt in chains near the judgment rail, faces pale, eyes fixed on the floor. Old Mara stood behind Rowan among witness staff, wrapped in a borrowed wool cloak, chin high. Sebastian took the dais and did not sit. Genevieve stood at his right, marked and unhidden, the nightshade signet now on her hand where it belonged. The mark at her neck burned warm under her collar. His mark over the heart showed above his open throat with deliberate clarity. By crown authority and witness challenge right, Sebastian said, voice carrying to the back stone. House Nightshade is restored in full. All lands, archives, and sovereign rights seized under false censure return immediately to its living heir, Genevieve Nightshade, recognized mate of the Alpha King and co-ruler by bonded law. A shockwave of murmurs swept the room. Genevieve stepped forward when he inclined his head to her. Hear the second decree, she said. From this dawn, wolf form shall not define legal worth in this realm. No child, servant, or citizen may be branded, ranked, sold, confined, or stripped of inheritance for lacking a shift. Any house enforcing caste by form commits treason against crown law. The silence this time held awe and fear and, in unexpected pockets, relief so fierce it looked like grief. A young guard on the west wall dropped to one knee first. Then an elder from a minor pack followed. Then entire rows bent, one after another, not to Sebastian alone, but to both of them. The sound of armor and cloth settling to stone rolled through the hall like surf. Judgment followed in full sight. Verena and Garin were stripped of rank and estate stewardship, sentenced to labor restitution under crown oversight, and lifetime ban from holding bonded servants. The bribed priests lost temple office and were exiled to frontier monasteries without political authority. Cordelia's exile tablet was read aloud, sealed, and mounted at the gate as precedent. Rowan was named High Marshal of the Reformed Court Guard. Mara accepted stewardship of the first crown sanctuary house. With tears she pretended were from smoke. By noon, the coronation claiming was moved to the open sky above the east terrace, where the full moon had witnessed the rite. Winter sun cut cold and bright across the mountains. Banners of Nightshade and Duskwalker flew side by side. There was no jeweled crown for Genevieve, only an old silver circlet recovered from the Queen Line vault and set with a single moonstone worn smooth by generations of women who had ruled in harder times. Sebastian lifted it with both hands and met her eyes before placing it on her head. "Genevieve Nightshade Duskwalker," he said, formal and unshaking. "My queen, my equal, my mate." She took the companion torque from Rowan's offered cushion and fastened it around Sebastian's throat herself. "Sebastian Duskwalker Nightshade," she answered, hearing the crowd draw a startled breath at the name order and enjoying it. "My king, my equal, my mate." The pack knelt as one. When they rose, children from the lower wards were already being guided through the terrace gates by sanctuary keepers to watch the new law read in plain language. Genevieve saw two wolfless girls clutching each other's hands near Mara and did not look away. She stepped down from the dais to them first, crouched so their eyes met hers, and showed them the mark at her neck and the signet on her hand. "You belong here," she said. Behind her, Sebastian began issuing deployment orders for sanctuary corridors in every territory: safe housing, legal aid, bonded labor abolition teams, neutral healers. His tone remained decisive, but the men receiving command looked at him differently now, not with shrinking fear, with earned allegiance. Evening settled violet over Moon Court before the last oath was sworn. On the terrace edge, with the realm still humming from upheaval, Genevieve and Sebastian stood shoulder to shoulder watching lanterns ignite across the lower city, each light a household choosing to stay for what came next. He slid his fingers through hers, marks warm against marks. "Still frightened?" she admitted. "So am I," he said. "We build anyway." She leaned into him, smiling at last without flinching. "Mine." His answering smile was fierce and soft all at once. "Yours." Under open sky, with their bond settled deep and steady, the kingdom bowed to both, and the name they had tried to use as a sentence became the first word of home.